It was mid-September 2017. I had just turned 33 a few months before. I worked as a delivery driver for a local hardware supply company in southern Idaho, and back then, I used to take a lot of solo camping trips to clear my head. I didn't have many close friends, no kids, no partner. Just me and my time off. There was something comforting in the quiet of the woods, especially when I picked remote spots far from other people. I liked hearing nothing but the wind pushing through the pine trees, the crackle of a campfire, or the slow steps of deer walking past my tent at night. This trip was meant to be one of those peaceful resets. I had found this old forest access road on a topographic map that led out past Salmon, Idaho, and wound deep into the Bitterroot range. The road didn't even have a name. It was just a dirt path, narrow and uneven, littered with loose rocks and washed out in a few spots. I'd marked a clearing on the map that looked flat and wide enough to set up a tent, near a little stream about 8 miles down the trail. The area was surrounded by thick pine forest and hugged up close to the western edge of a steep ridge. No campsites, no trail signs, no people. Just raw forest. I drove out in my old Chevy Silverado on a Thursday morning. The weather was starting to cool down that time of year, but the forecast said dry days and clear skies, maybe down to the high 30s at night. Perfect. I loaded up the truck with my tent, a cooler with 2 days worth of food, plenty of water, and the usual gear: fire starter, hatchet, camp stove, first aid, bear spray, and my Ruger handgun, which I always brought just in case. Not for animals so much, but more because you never know who's out in the woods. It's not always animals you have to be careful about. I made the turnoff onto the forest road just after lunch. It was rough going in the truck. Lots of bouncing, bottoming out in a few places, and 1 or 2 creek crossings that made me question whether I'd be able to get back up the way I came. But I made it. About 90 minutes later, I reached the clearing. It was better than I expected. Wide enough for a truck and tent, a little grassy in the middle, but not too uneven. A fire ring of stones someone had built maybe a few seasons ago was still there, half full of ash and charred wood. The stream ran just past a thin row of trees about 20 feet from the clearing and curved toward the east. The sun cut through the pine canopy just enough to keep the ground warm. I set up the tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and got everything ready for 2 nights. The first day was what I'd hoped for, peaceful. I cooked a quick dinner on my camp stove, some sausages and canned beans, and ate sitting on the tailgate of my truck, listening to the wind. I walked down the stream a little ways as the sun dipped behind the trees. The light turned golden, and I saw no signs of anyone.
No boat prints, no trash.
No broken branches from recent traffic, just nature. That night, I sat by the fire until close to 10, then crawled into my tent and slept well. I woke up just once around 2 a.m. when I heard something moving nearby, maybe 30 feet from the tent. It was quiet, slow, and I could tell it was heavy, but I figured it was probably a deer or elk. I reached for my handgun and waited, listening, but whatever it was moved on after a minute or 2. The silence came back, and I drifted off again. The second day started with a thick layer of fog rolling over the ridge. I made coffee over the fire and watched it lift slowly through the trees. I decided to do some hiking and exploring around the ridge to the north. I took my day pack, water, knife, bear spray, and a bit of food, and headed out around 9 a.m. The forest up that way was thick, steep in places with a lot of loose rocks and fallen branches. I followed a game trail that ran parallel to the ridge and climbed for maybe an hour before I came to a flat spot with a decent view. You could see the valley stretch out below and the stream glittering faintly through the trees back near camp. I stayed there a while, eating a granola bar, catching my breath, and just taking in the silence. That's when I noticed something odd. It was hard to tell at first. Just a flicker of something through the trees about a few hundred feet down the slope. It wasn't an animal. I've spent enough time in the woods to tell the difference. It was movement but low to the ground, like someone crouching. The figure didn't stand up. It didn't make any sounds. It just moved slowly through the brush and vanished into a patch of dark trees. I stared at the spot for a long time, not blinking. I listened hard. Nothing.
No crunching, no footsteps, no briefing.
Eventually, I chalked it up to my eyes playing tricks on me. Shadows or an animal moving just right. Still, it left me feeling off. I turned back toward camp earlier than I had planned. When I got back, nothing seemed disturbed. My gear was all there, my food untouched, my truck fine. I made lunch, then sat by the stream, trying to shake that uneasiness. I convinced myself it was nothing. I hadn't seen any vehicles or signs of people for over 24 hours. The clearing was still as quiet and calm as when I'd arrived. But that night, something changed. Around 1 a.m., I woke up suddenly. Not to a sound, not at first, but to a feeling, like someone was watching me. It was that old primal instinct. I sat up in my sleeping bag and held my breath. The woods were silent. No wind, no bugs, nothing. I listened for a full minute before I heard it. A soft, deliberate footstep. It came from the direction of the trees near the stream. Then another, crunching lightly on dry leaves. I reached slowly for my handgun and stayed quiet. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't unzip the tent or move too much. I just sat still and listened. More footsteps. Not fast. Careful. Slow. Getting closer. Then silence again. I stayed there for what felt like 20 minutes. I didn't hear anything else. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I got up and stepped outside the tent. The forest looked normal. The fire ring was undisturbed, but the dew was heavy and the leaves near the stream were scuffed. Fresh boot prints. Someone had walked right past my camp during the night, maybe even stopped. I looked around for any other signs. Nothing. No gear, no garbage, no signs of camping. Whoever it was didn't light a fire or stay nearby, just passed through or watched. I packed up my camp quicker than usual, loaded everything back in the truck and got ready to leave. But as I turned the ignition, the engine sputtered. Then nothing. I tried again. Click. Third time. Caught, but the dash lights flickered and it sounded rough. Something was off. I popped the hood and checked the battery cables. Everything looked fine. Oil and coolant levels were normal. No signs of a leak. I decided to drive out before anything else went wrong. The truck limped down the trail, sluggish. I had to keep the RPMs up just to keep it from stalling. When I got to a spot where I had to cross a shallow creek again, I hit the gas and barely made it through. At one point, maybe 2 miles from the main road, I stopped to let the engine cool. I got out, walked around, and that's when I noticed something wedged under the rear bumper. A strip of thin wire, looped and twisted, tied to a stick that had broken off. I didn't put it there. It looked like someone had rigged something to drag under the truck, maybe to snag or rip something loose. I checked the underside. Nothing obvious, but the feeling in my gut turned heavy. That wire wasn't there before. It wasn't random. Someone had been near my truck, maybe even messed with it during the night. I drove the rest of the way out and didn't stop until I reached a gas station outside Salmon. I popped the hood again, and a guy at the next pump came over and asked if I needed a hand. I told him the engine was acting up. He looked it over and pointed out something I missed. A few wire connections to the fuse box were loose, not ripped or corroded, but like they'd been gently pulled apart and tucked back in. Not enough to kill the truck, but enough to cause trouble. It hit me hard then. Someone had been trying to strand me out there, on purpose. And the worst part, they hadn't taken anything. Not my cooler, not my gear, not even my gas can. They didn't want my stuff. They just wanted me stuck. I left town that day and never went back to that side of the Bitterroots. I changed my routine too. I don't camp alone anymore, not deep in the woods, not without checking in with someone first. I installed a dash camera, a tracker, and always park in places with clear exits. I don't know who it was, what they wanted, or how long they had been watching me. Maybe just that night, maybe longer. But I do know this: they knew how to move quietly, how to hide, how to mess with a truck without breaking it, and how to vanish without a trace. That trip was supposed to clear my head. Instead, it reminded me that the scariest things out there aren't bears, or storms, or ghosts. It's people. People who don't say a word. People who just watch. It was the fall of 2018 when I decided to take a solo camping trip out west. I was 33 then, living in Omaha, working for a small contracting company, and I'd been grinding through a streak of 10-hour days, 6 days a week, for almost 3 months straight. I was tired, mentally cooked. My boss had finally given me a week off, so I packed up my Tacoma and left town. I wanted somewhere dry, open, and quiet. I didn't want trees. I didn't want lakes. I didn't want people. I wanted space, empty space. So I picked a place called Comb Ridge, out near the Utah-Arizona border. I'd read about it years ago in a geology magazine. Massive sandstone fins that stretch like the spine of some buried beast across the desert floor. Not many people go out there, not even tourists. The nearest town, Bluff, is barely more than a gas station and a few worn-down buildings. I drove straight through Colorado, slept once in the truck near a rest stop, and got to Bluff late in the afternoon 2 days later. I filled up the tank, grabbed water, some gas station snacks, and headed out west on a dusty road that ran parallel to the ridge. No real trail markers, just faint tire ruts in the dirt and sunburned shrubs. I followed the road for about 10 miles until I found a spot where the rocks opened up and I could park near a shallow wash. I set up my little ground tent maybe 100 feet from the truck, near the base of one of the red fins. There were no trees, no cover, just dirt, stone, and the whisper of wind against rock. Exactly what I wanted. That first night was uneventful. I cooked a can of chili over a butane stove, sat in my folding chair, and watched the stars until the cold started biting through my hoodie. No sounds but the wind and the occasional shifting of sand. Nothing unnatural, nothing strange. The second day, I spent most of it hiking along the base of the ridge. There were old cliff dwellings built into the rock walls, remnants from the ancestral Puebloans. Some of the structures were still intact, tucked deep into the alcoves where the rain never reached. I didn't touch anything, just looked. There were faint handprints painted in red on the stone, and narrow footpaths worn smooth by centuries of use. It was haunting and beautiful in the way that only empty places can be. That night, I cooked again, this time beans and rice with a little hot sauce. I ate slowly, watching the sun bleed out behind the fins, and then crawled into my sleeping bag around 9. The desert gets cold after sundown. My tent flapped lightly in the breeze, and I fell asleep to the sound of dry leaves and sand moving across the floor. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke up suddenly. I don't know what pulled me out of sleep, but my eyes were wide open and my ears were straining before I even knew what I was doing. The wind had stopped, completely. No flap,
No whistle.
nothing, just a weird, heavy stillness. At first, I thought it might have been an animal, maybe a coyote, maybe a deer, something that had wandered close to camp. But then I heard the crunch, not a quick scuffle, not a bird hopping around. It was a slow, deliberate footstep, heavy enough to register. Crunch, then another, then it stopped. I didn't move. I just lay there, eyes open, staring at the nylon above my head. The tent has mesh windows on both sides, and the moon was bright enough that I could see shadows moving outside. At first, I thought it was just the shadow of the fins shifting under the moonlight. But then I saw something pass by the tent, upright, on 2 legs. It didn't make sense. There's nobody out there. I was miles off any marked trail, on a rough, nearly invisible road, and I hadn't seen a single soul for more than a day. I should have heard a vehicle if someone had come in, but I hadn't. And this person was walking slow, like they didn't care if they were heard. I didn't even breathe. I just lay there, trying to keep my heartbeat from thudding through the nylon. The shadow stopped near the foot of the tent. I saw it clearly through the mesh. Long legs, a slight hunch, arms hanging. Couldn't see a face, just the shape. It stood there for maybe 30 seconds, then turned and walked back toward the wash. I heard the crunch of steps fade away until it was gone. I stayed awake until morning. When the sun came up, I unzipped the tent and walked the area. No prints, nothing fresh. The ground was hard-packed and crusty, not great for tracking, but still, no tire marks, no boots, nothing. I chalked it up to a dream. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing in that half-sleep state people get when they camp alone. Still, I kept my knife on me the rest of the day. Didn't hike far. That night, I locked the doors of the truck and slept inside it. Not because I was scared exactly, just unsettled. The cab felt safer. The windows offered some visibility. The tent just felt too exposed. At around the same time, close to 2:30 again, I heard movement. This time it came from behind the truck. I sat up quietly and stayed low, trying to peek over the steering wheel without being seen. The moon was bright again, and I could see the wash clearly, the tent 30 feet away, the rocks behind me rising like broken teeth. Then I saw it again, the figure, standing on the far side of the wash, facing the truck, not moving, just standing, watching. I strained my eyes. It looked like a man, but too thin, like long-limbed and stiff, almost like something was wrong with the way it held itself. And then it did something I still can't explain. Crouched, slow, mechanical, like someone doing it for the first time, and then crawled forward on all fours. It moved like it didn't know how. Its elbows jutted out too far. The knees dragged weirdly, like someone trying to act like an animal but doing it badly. It moved halfway across the wash, then stopped. I didn't move. I barely breathed. After maybe 5 minutes, it stood back up, awkward and shaky, and turned back toward the ridge. Then it was gone. That time, I knew I wasn't dreaming. I didn't sleep at all that night. At first light, I packed the tent, threw everything into the bed of the truck, and started driving out. But here's the thing. When I got to where the dirt road should have reconnected to the highway, it wasn't there. I drove the ruts backward and forward, looking for the turnoff. I had my GPS, but the signal was cutting in and out, and the map just showed a blank expanse. No lines, no roads, just desert. Eventually, I found a dry creek bed that led north and followed it, bouncing hard over rocks, scraping the undercarriage until I hit pavement again. I didn't stop in Bluff. I didn't stop anywhere. I drove all the way to Albuquerque before I pulled into a motel and slept for a full 12 hours. Now here's where it gets worse. Back in Omaha a couple weeks later, I was going through photos on my phone. I hadn't taken many, just a few shots of the ridge, some old ruins, the sunset on the first night. Then I found one I didn't take. It was a picture of my tent. Night, from maybe 30 feet away. Flash off, slightly blurry, like it was taken in a hurry. And in the bottom corner of the frame, just barely, was the shape of a hand. Pale, too long, half-cropped. I deleted it immediately. I don't know why. Felt wrong having it on my phone. I didn't tell anyone. I just pushed the whole trip out of my mind and tried to forget it. For months after, though, I had this feeling that something was still around. Not watching me exactly, but near. I started sleeping with my bedroom light on. I kept the curtains closed. I got a security camera for my front door, even though I lived in a decent neighborhood. But nothing ever happened again.
No sightings.
No footsteps. Nothing. The sense faded eventually. Life moved on. Now, years later, I've told myself it was probably just a person. Some hermit, maybe someone high, maybe someone messing with me. But that crawling, that shape, that picture I didn't take, it still bothers me. I've been camping since, but never alone. Never in the desert, and never west of Colorado. What scares me most isn't what I saw. It's that someone was out there, walking around in the middle of the night, miles from anything, pretending to be something they weren't. And they weren't pretending for me, they were practicing. I was 31 in the summer of 2017, working in logistics in Manchester, and I remember needing to get away more than anything else. I had this growing pressure in my chest that made it hard to sleep, and for some reason, I started thinking more and more about the Norfolk countryside. I used to go there as a kid with my uncle, and I remembered the quiet, the wind moving through the fields, the soft chirp of insects at night. I craved silence. So I booked a week off work, loaded up my old hatchback with some gear, and decided to go camping on my own for a few days. It wasn't one of those organized sites. I picked a spot I remembered from childhood, a wooded area near Holt, surrounded by farmland and only accessible by narrow, winding roads. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I'd be. I just said Norfolk. I wanted to disconnect. No emails, no phone calls, no people. The drive took longer than expected. I didn't use sat-nav, just paper maps and my memory. By the time I reached the gravel pull-in beside a hedge-lined field, it was already late afternoon. The trees had grown a lot since I last saw them, and I had to hike deeper in than I remembered to find a flat, dry clearing. There were signs others had camped there at some point. Ashes from an old fire, a rusted beer can half buried in the dirt, but it looked abandoned. That's what I wanted. I set up the tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and walked a short loop before the light faded. The forest felt safe in the daylight. Thin trunks, mostly ash and birch, let enough light through that I never felt boxed in. But I made note of landmarks anyway. An uprooted tree, a mossy rock, a rotted wooden fence buried halfway into the undergrowth, so I wouldn't get lost. I cooked some beans on a small stove, sat with my back against the tree, and listened to the stillness. The occasional rustle of something in the undergrowth, the soft hum of insects. I didn't even realize how fast night fell. When I turned off my headlamp, the dark was full and total. It wasn't scary, just isolating. The kind of darkness that made you aware of every sound, every twig snapping in the distance, every leaf shifting. But I was calm. I fell asleep easily that night. The second day passed quietly. I explored a bit, found an old path that curved toward a dry stone wall separating the woods from a wheat field. I didn't see a single person. The nearest road was a good mile off, and even that was barely used. I boiled water from a small stream using iodine tablets and spent most of the day walking, napping, or sitting still. It was what I'd needed, until the second night. I woke up around 1 a.m. I didn't know why. It wasn't a noise exactly, more a shift in pressure, like the woods had gotten heavier. I listened for a few minutes and almost convinced myself it was nothing when I heard the crunch. It wasn't a small animal. It was the distinct, slow compression of a heavy footstep on dry forest ground. I didn't move. I just lay still, barely breathing. Another crunch, and another, slow, deliberate, not circling, closer. I couldn't tell how close. The sound warped in the dark, but they stopped eventually. No sound after that. I stayed awake until the sun came up, too afraid to unzip the tent flap. When daylight finally came, I stepped out and looked around. Nothing.
No boat prints.
No sign anyone had been there. I told myself it was a deer, a large one. Maybe it wandered close to the tent. I'd seen that before in the Lake District. I even laughed at myself. The fear you feel at night vanishes with the sun. Still, I didn't go too far that day. I stayed within a few hundred feet of camp, just in case. The third night, I brought a long tent peg with me inside the sleeping bag. Not much of a weapon, but it was something solid, metal with a pointed end. It made me feel better. I didn't fall asleep easily that time. I kept jerking awake, listening. Hours passed like that. Then, just before 3 a.m., I heard it again. Not footsteps this time. Breathing. Very faint, but unmistakable. I froze. It was right outside the tent. I swear I could hear the shift of weight in the dirt. Whoever it was, they were standing still, just breathing. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. I couldn't move. I didn't even blink. Eventually, the breathing stopped. Just like that. No footsteps leaving. No sound. Just gone. By morning, I felt sick. I packed up quickly, but my hands shook so badly I dropped the stove twice. I considered hiking straight back to the car, but I hesitated. I'd spent 2.5 days there. I didn't want to overreact. Maybe it had been the wind in the tent fabric, or my own imagination, so I stayed one more night. This was the mistake. It started raining in the evening, light at first, then steady. I kept dry inside the tent, but the sound of water dripping onto the fabric made it harder to hear anything else. Around midnight, the rain stopped. That silence returned. I sat up, wide awake, peg in hand. Then something touched the tent wall. Not brushed past, touched, pressed into it. A hand, I think, flat and slow, like someone was feeling along the side, maybe trying to figure out where the zipper was. I didn't breathe. Then the sound of a match striking. A single flick. A small flash of orange glow through the nylon. Someone was lighting a match just outside. Then another. Then another. Each time, the light glowed for a second, then went dark. I stayed still, hand clenched around the peg, until it stopped. I didn't sleep. Couldn't. I just waited for the sky to turn gray. By morning, I knew I had to leave. I unzipped the tent and stepped out slowly. I checked the perimeter. Still no footprints. The rain had washed everything clean. But near the base of a tree about 10 feet away, I saw something. A burned match. Then another. I counted 12 of them, scattered in the dirt. That was it. I packed everything in a rush, barely even rolled the sleeping bag. I just shoved it all into my rucksack and started moving. I kept looking behind me. Every sound made me whip around. The woods didn't feel empty anymore. They felt observed. I reached the car just after noon. It was untouched, exactly where I left it. But as I opened the door, I saw something that made my heart skip. A small smear of ash across the driver's side window. Just one, as if someone had touched it with a match-blackened finger. I didn't stay another second. I drove straight out, didn't stop until I hit a petrol station 20 miles away. I used the bathroom mirror to check my face. I looked pale, drawn, my eyes too wide. I cleaned the ash off the window with a napkin and tossed it in the bin. I didn't call the police. What would I even say? That someone stood outside my tent and lit matches? For weeks after, I kept seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Shadows, glances, figures that weren't there. My sleep was wrecked. I'd bolt upright thinking I heard someone breathing. About a month later, I found myself looking up missing persons reports in Norfolk. I didn't know what I was expecting, maybe some pattern, but I didn't find anything solid. Eventually, the panic wore off. Life returned to normal, but I never went back there. I still camp, but always in groups, always in public sites. I've never spent another night alone in the woods, and I've never again heard the sound of a match being struck in the dark. But I think about it often. The matches, the breathing, the hand against the nylon. The worst part wasn't the fear. It was the control. Whoever it was, they didn't rush it. They didn't make a sound unless they wanted me to hear it. They weren't trying to scare me off. They were studying me, waiting, and I'll never know what for. My name is Alan, and this happened back in late September of 2022. I was 33 at the time, living in Reno, Nevada, and working as a freelance mechanical engineer. I was going through a rough patch. My relationship had ended, work had slowed down, and I needed a break from people, phones, and city noise. I've always enjoyed the outdoors, so I figured a short solo camping trip would clear my head. I picked a spot in Northern California, just a bit past Lassen National Forest. Not an official campground, but a quiet clearing I found a few years back during a road trip. It was surrounded by thick pine trees, far enough off the old gravel road that nobody would randomly walk by, and close enough to a small stream for water. I had camped there twice before, and nothing bad ever happened. It was peaceful. That's what I wanted. The forecast said light rain in the area, nothing serious, just some drizzle. I had my rain fly, a waterproof tent, and good boots, so I wasn't worried. I loaded up my Tacoma with my gear: tent, sleeping bag, stove, water filter, hatchet, flashlight, first aid kit, and enough food for 2 nights. I left on a Thursday morning. The drive out took about 5 hours. I stopped in Susanville for gas and a few snacks, then drove another hour and a half down smaller forest roads until I reached the spot. The last mile or so was a rough dirt path. My truck handled it fine. When I got there, I was the only one around, just like I hoped. The clearing looked the same. Soft pine needles underfoot, the same half-buried tree stump I remembered, and that steady, quiet trickle of the stream nearby. I parked the truck and started setting up camp. It was overcast and cool, but dry. The kind of calm before the storm. I got the tent up, staked it tight, and threw the rain fly over it. I stacked some firewood I brought along, set up my little fold-out table and chair, and boiled water for a cup of instant coffee. By early afternoon, I was settled in. I spent the rest of the day walking around the area, checking out the stream and scouting for firewood. I didn't bring a gun, just a long camping knife, but I kept my eyes open for signs of wildlife. It was bear country after all. I didn't see any fresh tracks or droppings, just a few squirrels and birds. Nothing to worry about. Around 5 in the evening, it started drizzling lightly. I made a quick dinner, canned chili with crackers, and ate under the small tarp I tied to 2 trees near the tent. I had a headlamp on and read a paperback mystery novel for a while, listening to the soft rain tap against the tarp and the tree leaves above. It was exactly what I needed. No distractions, just the woods and the rain and the quiet. It got dark fast, that kind of darkness that swallows everything. I turned off my light and listened. The rain got heavier. Wind picked up too. The trees started swaying. My tarp flapped, and I made a mental note to retie one of the cords in the morning. Around 9, I climbed into my tent and zipped it shut. I lay there for a while, not sleeping, just listening to the storm. Rain pounding the tent fly, trees creaking, the occasional snap of a branch somewhere out there. It wasn't scary, not at first. Felt cozy. The wind blew hard a few times, but the tent held steady. I was dry, warm, and tired. I must have fallen asleep close to midnight. I woke up around 2 in the morning. Not from a sound, from something else. A feeling. You know that strange moment when you go from deep sleep to fully awake in a second? That's what it felt like. My eyes opened and I was instantly alert. The rain hadn't stopped, and the wind was still going strong. But something felt different. I stayed still, listening. I could hear the stream faintly, the trees, the rain hitting the tent, and then something else, very faint, almost masked by the rain. It sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy ones, not crunching leaves, just the soft thud of something stepping through wet needles and dirt. My heart started beating faster. I held my breath and kept listening. Then I heard it again. 3, maybe 4 steps. Then silence. I slowly unzipped my sleeping bag, moving as quietly as I could. I sat up and reached for the flashlight. I clicked it on and aimed it at the tent wall, not turning it toward the front door. I didn't want to light myself up like a lantern. I waited another minute. Then something moved again, closer this time. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't that kind of movement. It sounded like someone walking barefoot or in socks. Just the dull press of weight into soft ground. Too slow and steady to be a deer, not the skittering steps of a raccoon or coyote. And it was only one set of footsteps. That's what really stuck in my head. There was only one. I held the flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other. I didn't know what I was going to do with either of them. I just sat frozen in place, listening. The rain kept hammering the tent. The wind blew hard again. A branch snapped somewhere far off. And then everything got quiet.
No footsteps.
Just storm noise. Another few minutes passed. I turned off the flashlight to save battery and crouched by the tent door. I didn't want to unzip it, but I needed to know if someone or something was actually out there. I didn't hear any more movement, but the feeling hadn't gone away. That heavy, cold awareness that I wasn't alone. I stayed like that for at least 15 minutes. My legs started to cramp. I finally crawled back to my sleeping bag and lay on top of it fully dressed. I held the flashlight tight in one hand and the knife in the other. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just stared at the tent ceiling, waiting to hear that sound again. It never came. By the time light started filtering through the trees, the storm had died down. The rain turned into a soft mist. I stepped out of the tent slowly, checking every direction. Everything looked normal, but that didn't make me feel better. I walked around the tent and found the footprints right away. Just one set, heavy prints in the soft mud, heading toward the tent from the woods and stopping about 10 feet away. Then they turned around and went back the way they came. They weren't mine. I checked my boots and compared them. Different tread, deeper. These prints were bigger than mine and had an odd shape, like the person wasn't wearing proper hiking boots. More like worn-out work boots or something. Wide heel marks, uneven depth. One step looked like a limp or a dragging foot. The strangest part was that the prints didn't go near my truck. They didn't circle the site, just came from the trees, paused near the tent, and left. I followed them into the woods a bit. They weaved between some pines and disappeared near a fallen log about 50 yards out. Beyond that, the ground was too covered in pine needles to track. That was enough for me. I packed up everything in under 20 minutes. Tent, tarp, stove. All of it got jammed into the back of the truck as fast as I could. I didn't eat. I didn't even refill my water bottle. I just wanted to leave. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. Driving back out on the muddy trail was slow, but I didn't care. I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see someone step out of the woods. I never did. Once I got back to the main road, I finally let myself breathe. I stopped at a gas station in Westwood to get coffee and warm up. I must have looked like hell. Wet clothes, bags under my eyes, muddy boots. The woman behind the counter didn't ask questions. I didn't say anything either. I made it home that afternoon and took the longest hot shower of my life. I haven't been back to that spot since. I don't know who was out there that night. Maybe it was just some crazy drifter. Maybe it was a local who saw my camp and wanted to mess with me. Whoever it was didn't try to rob me, didn't take anything, didn't break into my truck or cut the tent open. They just walked up in the rain, stood there for a while and walked away, like they were watching me sleep, like they were trying to decide something. Still bothers me even now. I still go camping, but never alone, and never in that part of the forest. Not after that night. It was the summer of 2011. I was 32 years old and had just taken 2 weeks off from my job at a repair shop in western Pennsylvania. I had no kids, no big commitments, and my only real plan was to get out of town, be alone, and clear my head. I've been thinking a lot about life lately. I wasn't in any trouble or anything like that, but sometimes you get stuck in a loop. Same town, same routine, same everything. I needed something different. I had this beat-up blue 1997 Chevy Tahoe, packed with a couple weeks' worth of canned food, water, a folding chair, my tent, a little propane stove, sleeping bag, a knife, some camping tools, and a 12-gauge Mossberg 500 just in case I ran into any wildlife. I didn't carry it to feel macho. It's just when you're out that far and you're sleeping where bears or coyotes might show up, it's better to be safe than sorry. I'd done a lot of camping before, mostly in woods, near rivers, or on the edge of state parks. But this time, I wanted something odd, something people didn't do every day. So I drove northeast into the hills near Susquehanna County, not far from the New York border. I remembered an old graveyard up there on Ridge Hollow Road. I'd passed it years ago during a short trip. It wasn't maintained by the state or even a church anymore. Just one of those forgotten places sitting on public land, overgrown and sinking into the woods. The road leading to it was cracked and half swallowed by dirt and leaves. I figured nobody would be up there, and that's exactly what I wanted. No tourists, no other campers, no noise. I got there around 3 in the afternoon after driving for about 6 hours. The sun was still strong, and I could smell that dry summer air, the kind that burns the grass and makes everything smell like dust and weeds. I parked the truck just off the gravel road and walked the rest of the way with my gear. The graveyard sat behind a rusted wire fence that had partially collapsed. Most of the stones were unreadable, worn down to stumps or crooked slabs poking out of the soil. The trees had grown thick around the outer edge, and the whole place was wrapped in shadows, even with the sun still up. I set up camp about 20 yards beyond the graveyard fence, down in a shallow dip near a tree line. It felt weird camping that close to a place like that, but I didn't feel scared. It was just old rock and dirt. The dead were long gone. I wasn't thinking about ghosts or anything like that. What made me pause a little was how quiet it was.
No birds. No bugs.
Just the wind moving through the branches. I got my tent staked down, gathered some dry wood, and cooked a quick meal. Just beans and sausage. By the time I finished and cleaned up, the sun was dipping low. I climbed the ridge again and walked through the graveyard for a while. It was kind of peaceful in a strange way. The stones didn't mean much anymore. The names were mostly gone. The dates that were still visible said things like 1862 to 1875, or born 1801. This place had been dead a long time. Nothing left here but trees, moss, and whatever was buried 6 feet under. That first night, I sat by the fire until about 10 and then crawled into my tent. The ground was hard, but I was used to it. The stars were out, and the wind had finally calmed down. I slept okay, only waking once when I thought I heard footsteps. But when I poked my head out, nothing was there. I told myself it was probably a deer or a raccoon. The next morning, I woke up early and went on a long hike. I didn't bring my phone, didn't want GPS. I had a paper map and compass in my pack. I didn't want to see a screen or hear a ringtone. I walked about 4 miles through thick brush uphill, following a game trail. I spotted a couple of deer, a wild turkey, and some old foundations, stone outlines of what might have been houses 100 years ago. I stopped near one of them and had lunch on a stump, thinking about how people used to live so far out here with nothing but wood, fire, and each other. I got back to camp around 5 p.m. and rested. My legs were sore, and my shirt was soaked with sweat. I built the fire again, ate something simple, then went up to the graveyard again, just as the light started to dim. The shadows stretched long across the grass, and a few bats fluttered between the trees. I stepped over a broken stone and saw something odd. on the far edge of the graveyard, there was a newer-looking wooden post in the ground. Not like the rest. It looked like someone had hammered it in recently. It wasn't a gravestone, just a post, with an old rope tied to it. The rope had been cut and frayed at the end, hanging limp. I knelt down and ran my fingers over the wood. It hadn't been there long. A few months, maybe. Definitely not from the 1800s. I looked around but didn't see any footprints or trash or anything that might have belonged to someone. Just empty woods and the edge of the graveyard. Still, it made me uneasy. That night, I kept the fire going longer. I sat with the shotgun close to me, just listening. At around midnight, I heard something again. Not footsteps, but something heavier. A crunch of branches, followed by the sound of breathing. Real heavy, labored breathing. I stood up slow and grabbed the flashlight. I shined it toward the sound, but there was nothing. I called out just a word, hoping it was a bear so it would run off. Nothing moved, but the breathing stopped. I stayed up until the fire died down and then crawled into the tent with my boots still on and the shotgun next to me. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I searched the area. I found broken twigs in the woods just 20 feet from camp and what looked like a footprint, barefoot.
No tread, no shoe marks.
Just a dirty heel print in the soft soil. I tried to tell myself maybe someone came up here, maybe a local kid messing around, but it didn't feel like a joke. Whoever it was hadn't left anything behind. No beer cans, no wrappers, no signs of camping. And that post with the rope stuck in my head. I moved my tent farther downhill that day, closer to the truck. I told myself it was just for comfort, but I knew better. I wasn't ready to leave yet, though. I don't know why. Some kind of stubbornness, I guess. I didn't want to spook myself out of a place just because something strange happened. But things got worse. That night, I stayed inside the truck with the seat leaned back. I kept the windows cracked, doors locked, and the shotgun laid across the seat. Around 3 a.m., I woke up because the truck was shaking. Not like an engine shake, like something was pushing it. I sat up fast and looked out the side mirror. Nothing, just trees and dark. But then I heard tapping. Not on the door, but on the glass at the back hatch. I turned and looked, and through the fogged-up rear window, I saw a shape. Not a full body, just the outline of a head and shoulders. It wasn't moving, just standing there. I fumbled for the flashlight and aimed it backward. By the time I turned it on, the shape was gone. I opened the door, got out, and swept the light around. Nobody. I walked around the truck, heart hammering in my chest, finger on the trigger guard. I didn't go too far, just enough to check the perimeter. But the dirt near the rear tires had prints again, bare feet, and they were facing the back window. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. At sunrise, I packed everything into the truck. Tent, stove, gear, all of it. I wasn't going to wait around to see what happened next. I drove straight out of there and didn't look back until I hit the main road. I kept driving until I reached a town called Montrose. I got a cheap motel room and sat under the shower for 20 minutes, trying to clear my head. The next day, I went to the local sheriff's office. I didn't report a crime, just asked some questions. I told them I was camping near Ridge Hollow and wondered if anyone else had reported strange things up there. The deputy behind the desk raised his eyebrows and asked why I was camping up there in the first place. I told him I just wanted to be alone. He didn't give me much, just said it wasn't illegal, but people didn't go up there anymore. Too grown over, too forgotten. I asked if anything had ever happened there. He said not officially, but some folks used to say that Ridge was used for more than just burials. Back during Prohibition and even later, people went up there to do things away from the law. Illegal things, sometimes violent things. He didn't give details, just looked at me and said, "You're better off not sleeping in graveyards." I never went back. I still think about it sometimes, especially the prince. Who walks barefoot in the woods at night, that far from town? Who watches someone sleep inside a truck and doesn't try to talk or break in or ask for help? Why was that post out there with the rope? I don't have answers, but it wasn't a ghost. It was a person, or maybe a few, and that scared me more than anything else. Because people don't always need a reason to do something bad. Some just wait out there where no one's watching. I was 36 when I decided to go camping by myself that September. It was early fall, the kind where the nights drop cold fast, but the days are still warm and dry. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I'd had a pretty heavy year. Divorce, job change, and just a lot of pressure that built up over months. I was tired of being around people and constantly feeling like I had to explain what I was doing or why I hadn't bounced back yet. I needed quiet, real quiet. No phones, no traffic, no lights glowing under my curtains at night. Just woods and air and the kind of silence that makes you listen to your heartbeat. I didn't want to go too far, but still needed it to feel like I was out in the middle of nowhere. I'd heard of the Wesser Creek Trail in North Carolina, just a couple of hours' drive from where I lived. Not many people went up that way. Most hikers stuck to the more popular parts of the Appalachian Trail. I did some quick research, saw a few old forum posts about the area, and figured I'd give it a go. The plan was to hike in about 4 or 5 miles, set up camp by the water, stay 2 nights, and hike out on the 3rd morning. I left on a Wednesday early in the morning. My pack was heavy with the usual gear: tent, sleeping bag, jet boil, 2 days worth of food, extra socks, water filter, bear spray, all that. I parked at the small pull-off where the forest road ended. There were no other cars there, just a little gravel clearing with leaves starting to build up from the early fall drop. I signed into the logbook tucked in the weatherproof box at the trailhead. Last person had signed in 5 days before me. I noted it, but it didn't bother me. That's what I wanted after all solitude. The hike in was slow. The trail had probably been nice 10 or 15 years ago, but now it was mostly just a narrow path with overgrown brush and blowdowns every quarter mile. I had to crawl under one log, then later climb over another one slick with moss. Still, it felt good to move, good to have trees on all sides and to hear nothing but the breeze pushing through the branches and the sound of my boots against the dirt. By mid-afternoon, I made it to where I wanted to camp, a small clearing near a bend in Wesser Creek. The ground was mostly level, with enough space to pitch the tent and keep some distance from the fire pit I found already built, probably from other hikers or hunters who passed through. I set up, hung my food bag from a thick branch a good 30 yards out, and got a little fire going as the shadows started to stretch. I remember just sitting there for a long time watching the water. The creek wasn't loud, but steady, like a soft whisper that never stopped. Felt peaceful, and it stayed that way all through the first night. I woke up once around 2 a.m. to pee and stood outside the tent for a minute or two. There was no wind, and the sky was full of stars. Everything was still. I went back in the tent, zipped it up, and fell asleep again pretty quick. The next day was just more of the same peace and quiet. I hiked upstream a little, filled my bottle with filtered water, sat on a flat rock and just let time pass. I didn't check the time once that whole day. At some point in the late afternoon, I started making some freeze-dried food and added a couple of sticks to the fire I had going again. That was when I noticed the first odd thing. It was small, just a stick, looked freshly broken, leaning up against the base of a tree a little too neatly, about 15 feet away. I hadn't seen it there before. I'm not the type to think the woods are full of mysteries or anything, but I knew I hadn't put it there. Maybe I missed it. Maybe it had been part of a limb that snapped and fell and landed like that. I told myself it was nothing. Probably was. Still, I took a few glances at it while eating. The second night, I had a harder time sleeping. Not because I was scared, just because my back was a little stiff and the cold kept creeping into my bag. I must have drifted in and out of sleep, because I remember hearing the creak a few times and then nothing for long stretches. But around maybe 3 a.m., I woke up again. This time it was because of a noise, something distinct, a stick cracking close. I stayed still. I kept telling myself animals move around at night all the time. That's normal. But this sound wasn't the quick, scurrying kind of sound you hear from raccoons or possums. It was slower, more deliberate. I waited, holding my breath, listening. There was nothing for a while, then another crack. Closer now. I slowly reached for the bear spray I kept by my side in the tent and held it in my hand, just in case. I didn't unzip the tent. I just waited. After another minute, the sounds stopped altogether. No movement, no more cracking. I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, I walked around the perimeter of my camp. I looked at the dirt and the damp spots by the trees. There weren't any clear boot prints or anything, but about 30 feet from my tent I found another stick, this one smaller, balanced against a different tree in almost the exact same way as the one from the day before. That wasn't natural. I didn't like it, and I started thinking maybe someone else was in the area messing around. Some backwoods hunter maybe, or just a jerk who got a kick out of creeping people out. Still, I figured if they wanted to hurt me, they'd have done it already, and I was heading out the next morning anyway. I didn't light a fire that night. I ate cold food and stayed inside my tent with the zipper half open so I could hear better. No headphones, no books, no distractions. Just me, laying still, listening to the woods. Sometime around midnight, I heard movement again. This time it was even slower. No snapping branches, just the sound of something brushing through low brush and grass, like a large person trying to move quietly but not succeeding. It circled the area once. I could feel the direction change by the sound. From one side of the tent to the back, then over near where I'd hung the food bag. Then nothing. Total silence. About 10 minutes passed. Then came the sharp clink of metal, soft but distinct. That made my heart pound. I kept my cooking gear stacked inside a small bag by a log near the fire ring. That metal sound was something, maybe a pot, being moved. That wasn't a raccoon. No way. I sat up and quietly got my boots on, bear spray still in my hand. After a long stretch of silence, I unzipped the tent slowly and poked my head out. The moonlight gave enough light to see the shapes of trees and the outline of my gear pile. I stared for what felt like forever, looking for movement. Nothing. I stepped out, still listening. No wind, just the creak again. I moved to the gear pile. One pot was on its side now, a couple of feet from the rest. The bag had been pulled slightly open. That metal clink I'd heard was real. Someone had touched it. I turned slowly, trying to spot anything in the woods around me. That's when I saw him. A man, standing maybe 40 feet away, beyond the edge of the trees.
No flashlight. No visible gear.
Just a figure in a dark jacket, watching. He wasn't moving. My whole body went tight. I didn't run. I didn't yell. I just stood there frozen with the bear spray ready. After maybe 5 seconds, longest 5 seconds of my life, he turned and walked away, slow and steady, back into the trees. I stayed up till dawn, sitting by the fire ring with my back to a tree and both a knife and spray in hand. I didn't sleep at all. The woods stayed quiet, and the man never came back. But I knew I wasn't alone out there. At first light, I packed everything up faster than I ever had before. I didn't bother cooking breakfast. I grabbed my gear, double-checked that I hadn't left anything, and took off down the trail. Every 100 yards, I stopped and turned to listen. My nerves were shot. At one point, I swear I heard steps behind me, but I couldn't see anything. Could have been paranoia. Could have been him. I didn't wait to find out. The trail back felt 10 times longer than it had 2 days earlier. I didn't stop to rest once. I made it to the car by noon and got out of there as fast as I could. I never called the cops. What could I have told them? Some guy watched me from the woods? No name, no face, no harm done? They wouldn't have taken it seriously. And maybe there was nothing to report. But I knew what I saw. That wasn't an accident. He didn't stumble onto my camp. He'd been there the night before, and probably watching the whole time. The sticks against the trees, that was him, leaving signs, letting me know. To this day, I don't know what he wanted. I don't know why he didn't do anything more. Maybe just watching was enough for him. Or maybe he was waiting for something that didn't happen. But I haven't been camping alone since. I still go into the woods sometimes. Day hikes, short trails. But once the sun starts dipping low, I head back to the truck. I've got no interest in finding out what would have happened if I'd stayed one more night. I was 34 when I went on that hunting trip to Deer Creek in the fall of 2013. Back then, I lived just outside of Carson, Wyoming, a small quiet town that didn't see much trouble. I worked at a lumber mill, lived in a modest house with a fenced yard, and didn't have much in the way of family except for a younger sister down in Colorado. I wasn't married, didn't have kids, just me and my rifle most weekends, and I was fine with that. Every October, I'd take a week off work to go hunting. I liked being alone in the woods. No traffic, no small talk, just the cold air and the sound of your own boots on the dirt. That year, I decided to head deeper than usual, north of Deer Creek, about 3 miles off any trail. I'd studied the topographic maps ahead of time and found a small plateau with a stream nearby and signs of game. I figured it would be a good place to camp and hunt for mule deer. I packed my gear with care. My Remington 700.30-06, 2 boxes of cartridges, a large canvas tent, sleeping bag, propane stove, freeze-dried food, a map, compass, and a GPS backup just in case. I also brought a small hatchet, a hunting knife, and my usual first aid kit. I always over-prepared because when you're alone in the wild, nobody's coming to help you if something goes sideways. I drove my truck down a forestry road until it turned to gravel, then kept going until it became little more than 2-tire ruts in the weeds. From there, I parked in a wide pull-off where I wouldn't be seen from the road. I slung my pack over my shoulders, locked up, and started the hike up toward the spot I'd marked. The air was cold, sharp with the smell of pine. Fall hadn't yet brought snow, but the leaves were turning, and the wind had a chill that cut through my jacket when it picked up. The hike took about 2 hours, and I broke a sweat halfway up. The sun was lower when I reached the clearing. It was as perfect as I hoped, level ground, a view of the ridgeline to the east, and a gentle slope toward a creek just 100 yards down. I could hear the water running before I saw it. I set up camp methodically, as I always did. Tent first, then the sleeping bag rolled out, then the stove and cookware. Once I had everything in order, I walked the area a bit. I spotted fresh droppings and a few tracks, good signs. A scrape mark on a tree told me a buck had been through recently. I was excited. I ate a quick meal of rehydrated stew, drank some coffee, and sat by the tent until dark. The woods were quiet, just wind and the occasional crack of a branch. That night, I slept soundly. Nothing unusual. The second day, I was up before the sun. I made coffee, threw on an extra layer, and headed toward a saddle between 2 ridges where I expected deer to cross. I moved slowly, pausing often, eyes scanning, ears open. By mid-morning, I saw a doe and 2 yearlings but held off. I was after a buck. I stayed out until just before dusk and hiked back to camp, empty-handed but satisfied. That's how it usually went. The early days were for watching. Back at camp, I cooked, cleaned my gear, and wrote a few notes in a small waterproof notebook I kept. Still, nothing unusual. The third morning, though, something felt off. When I stepped outside the tent, I saw fresh boot prints in the soft dirt near the creek. That stopped me cold. They weren't mine. They were newer, too. I always wore the same pair of heavy-soled hunting boots, and I could recognize my own tread easily. These were different, wider, maybe a size 11 or 12, with a more rounded heel pattern. They came from the tree line, stopped near the water, and then turned back. I stood there for a long minute, scanning the woods. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anyone. Whoever it was hadn't disturbed my tent or gear, and nothing was missing. Still, it put me on edge. That far out, you don't expect company. If someone was out here, I wanted to know why. I spent most of that day checking the area. I moved carefully, circling the camp, scanning for signs. I found no more tracks, no signs of a second camp, no trail markers or broken branches. Nothing that said someone had moved through recently. Just those damn footprints. I slept lightly that night, my rifle close by, ears tuned for the sound of anything unnatural. I heard nothing. The fourth day, I hunted closer to camp. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't want to be too far in case I had to pack up and move. I saw another doe, but nothing worth taking. The boot prints were still visible near the creek, and I studied them again. Still only one set, still headed in and out in the same direction. I tried to shake it off. Maybe someone else had just passed through. Maybe they were as surprised to see my prints as I was to see theirs. That night, something strange happened. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of crunching leaves outside my tent. Not an animal. It was too slow, too deliberate. I stayed still, every muscle tight, listening. It stopped just outside the tent. No breathing, no flashlight, no movement. I waited a full 10 minutes. Then I reached for the zipper, fast and quiet, and peeked out. There was no one there, but I could see the faint outline of fresh prints in the frosty grass, leading away. I didn't sleep after that. The first light, I broke camp. I wasn't panicked, but I didn't like the idea of someone sneaking around my tent in the dead of night. I packed everything back into my frame pack and started hiking out. But halfway down the slope, I stopped. I saw something through the trees, off to the left, near the base of a dry ridge. It was the corner of a camouflage tarp, half buried under pine needles. I stepped closer. Under it was a small nylon tent, almost invisible if you weren't looking. No markings, no fire pit, no trail. Just a sleeping bag, a half-eaten food packet, and some empty water bottles. A backpack was stashed against a log nearby. I didn't touch anything, just looked. Something felt off. It wasn't abandoned, not really. There were signs someone had slept there recently. And then I saw something else. Binoculars on a tripod, aimed right toward the spot where my tent had been. That hit me hard. Whoever this was, they'd been watching me, maybe for days. I didn't stay to investigate further. I backtracked, put distance between me and that camp, and cut a wider path back to the road. I didn't stop moving. My heart was racing the whole time. I didn't feel safe until I saw the glint of my truck through the trees. When I finally got to it, I checked the tires and undercarriage. All looked fine. I got in and drove straight back to town. I didn't tell anyone right away. A part of me thought maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe it was a coincidence. But a week later, I reported the location to the sheriff's office anyway. They said they'd send someone to check it out, but I never heard anything back. I didn't go hunting the next year, or the year after that. I told myself I was busy, that work was too demanding. But the truth was, every time I thought about heading back out alone, I remembered that night. The sound of leaves crunching, the way those binoculars were aimed right at me, the footprints. Something about it still doesn't sit right with me. Maybe it was just a drifter, maybe someone with issues. But I've thought a lot about how things could have gone differently. If I hadn't woken up, if I hadn't looked out, if I had stayed another night. Sometimes people assume the woods are dangerous because of animals, bears or cougars. But animals don't sit in the dark outside your tent. Animals don't bring binoculars. They don't watch. I still hunt now, but only on leased land, and always with someone else. I don't camp far out anymore. I don't go off trail, and I never assume I'm alone. That trip changed the way I think about the woods. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I almost didn't. And that's what stays with me. The silence, the watching, and the feeling that I was never really as alone as I thought.